Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mayflower Church. It is about 9:50, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, Mayflower, and anyone else who might be joining us this morning. I'm going to open this up with a word of prayer, so if you could all please pray with me. God, we thank you so much for meeting us in this space here. We ask that you open our hearts, open our minds. May we hear your voice calling us to create a more just and more compassionate world for your beloved in the trans community. Empower us to combat white supremacy in all of the ways in our institutions, in our bodies, in our homes, God. May you continue to grant us the love that we need to continue on in this journey, God. And we thank you so much for Councilwoman Jenkins and her presence here this morning. We ask that we hear your voice through her as she brings her presentation and her talk, God. It's in your many names we pray. Amen. Well, it is a joy to be with you all, and we're all so glad that you're here. If everyone could please mute themselves, take the time to hit mute. It's at the bottom left corner of your screen there. This morning we have Councilwoman Andrea Jenkins joining us. Andrea Jenkins has more than 25 years of public service experience as a Minneapolis City Council policy aide, a nonprofit executive director and consultant, and Hennepin County employment specialist. During her time as a policy aide, she worked alongside Council Member Glidden to initiate and facilitate several other projects, including the development of the Seward Co-op Friendship Store, which brings good jobs and fresh food to the community, the Chicago Avenue Fine Arts Center, One Minneapolis, One Read, a community building project to address racial healing and understanding, the Trans Equity Summit, a project to promote awareness and inclusion of the city's trans and gender nonconforming communities. And on November 7th, 2017, Andrea Jenkins made history as the first African-American transgender woman to be elected to the city council of a major city. Before I hand it over, if you haven't been here in the previous weeks for our Q&A, what we will do is during Councilwoman Jenkins' presentation, as questions come up for you, go ahead and message me those questions here in the chat box. Do not email them to me. Just go ahead and message me those questions here. And as we transition to the Q&A session, then I will proceed to ask those questions. So Councilwoman, the virtual floor is yours.
Wow. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. You make me sound important. I might need to borrow that introduction from you so I can use it elsewhere. Thank you very much. Before the call got started, I was just saying that I woke up this morning feeling grateful, and that's not necessarily a everyday occurrence lately. We have been through so many challenges as a nation, certainly as a city, and even more closely to home as a city council member. I represent the area in which the ward in which 38th in Chicago sits. It is I've always considered it the epicenter of the ward and the soul of the city. And now it has become the epicenter of the world. It is, you cannot turn on your television without seeing an image of cup foods flashing on the screen, or some talking head mentioning George Floyd. The United States Congress has created a bill called the George Floyd Criminal Justice Act. So literally, this intersection sits at the center of the world, in particularly in terms of social justice, in terms of racial justice, and equity. which are some of the things that I have been struggling for and fighting for a very, very long time. Um, you know, one of the things that you didn't mention, Brother Briones, is that I'm a writer and an artist and a poet, and that is that you know, that's the work I actually feel most proud of. You know, and maybe not everybody agrees with that, but I certainly do. And I think, you know, earlier this week, um, during our somewhat peaceful transition of power, and I use that term somewhat just because there were 25,000 National Guard troops there to make sure that it was a peaceful transfer of power. And so, you know, anytime you need that many soldiers, is it really the absence of peace? I'm not quite sure, or the absence of violence. So, um, but one of the things that we witnessed was the power of poetry and art and how that shapes and impacts our world. And none more illustrative of that than the poem "The Hill We Climb" by Amanda Gorman. And you know, I've tried to incorporate poetry into um, my life's work, into my work on the council, um, into the talks that I give. And so to that end, I'm going to open up with a poem. Um, you know, I guess before I do that, I do want to just take the time to do a land acknowledgement that we stand on Dakota and Ojibwe land. And anywhere in the United States, we are in a country that was, that is indigenous native land, um, stolen land. And this country, we know, was built on stolen labor. And so we always need to acknowledge that. You know, one of the things that I've done at the city council is bring forth a resolution declaring, um, establishing a truth and reconciliation um, process so that we can begin to get to the underlying roots of the racism and the challenges that we face in our community. I see that Kathy Brown has a E.E. Cummings poem in the background. How fitting, I think. In fact, E.E. Cummings was one of my poetic heroes as a young child, and so appreciate seeing that in the background. But I'm going to open up with a poem that's a little autobiographical. It's a poem that's from my uh, first collection, full collection of poetry called "The Tea Is Not Silent." Um, it's available on Amazon if people like the work that they hear. But the piece is called "Black Pearl." Black pearl, precious little girl, you've been in the background much too long. Black pearl, precious little girl, come into the sunshine where you belong. Black pearl, black girl, hiding behind the body of a little boy. You knew you were different from the start. Deep in your heart, you would always stand apart from those who were. normal, whatever that is. Black pearl, black girl, all the little boys knew. They tried to do the nasty to you. When nobody was looking, tried to be your nighttime lover in the dark. Black girl, the science teacher told your mama, he's such a happy-go-lucky little boy. There was no joy. Your pain was deep. Why me, God? You prayed on midnight knees. Black Pearl strolled around the neighborhood for the first time at 12 years old. 2 p.m. sun bouncing off your mama's wig, heels, lipstick, the whole nine. And the old men at the barbershop, and the body shop, liquor store, whistled and hissed. And you just wanted to be kissed like a girl. Black Pearl, precious little girl, you've been in the background much too long. Black Pearl, precious little girl, come into the sunshine where you belong. Black Pearl tried to hide the shame, dated girls, but it was all a game. No one could see beyond the darkness. The indigo blues seemed like nothing really mattered but the way the silk caressed your brown skin, black girl. You loved how your legs transformed themselves into Hollywood gams when you slipped on those pumps, felt like the heart of a woman was beating beneath your unblossomed chest. A disease was brewing between you and yourself, trying to understand why anger followed you around like a baby brother. No rhythm, no rhyme. Black Pearl took the L all the way downtown, found a book at the Harold Washington Public Library about a woman just like you. Realized that others had been through the fire, to the limit, to the wall, and for one chance to be yourself, decided to risk it all. Black girl. This is not a dream deferred. Life is to be lived, not a wound to hide, but a gem to be displayed. From that day to this, she held her head a little higher, never cried aloud. For once, she was proud. Thanked God for the sunshine. Black Pearl, black girl. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of set the stage with a little poetry. I know that a part of this conversation is to talk about the trans identity, and certainly that is a big part of my life and my identity, and so I wanted to open with that. I wanted to share another piece of writing with you guys that talks about why I decided to run for city council. And, before this conversation today, Brother Briones and I had a conversation, and some of the areas that we thought might be important, I think, are captured in this essay. So my whole life, I have served my community. I have seen how policy impacts people's lives. My first job was with Junior Achievement of the Upper Midwest. I worked as a business basics recruiter. I recruited volunteers to go into the 5th and 6th grade classrooms to teach business basics once a week. One of my recruits was then City Council President Jackie Cherry Holmes. She thought it was critical for young people to meet adults in leadership roles. And I thought it was inspiring to see political leaders like Jackie engage with their community. My next job was as a counselor at a chemical dependency treatment center. There I helped people, mostly people of color, find employment as they worked to overcome addictions. This was in the early 1990s. The crack epidemic was in full swing in Minneapolis, and there was no shortage of people to work with. Many of my clients were dealing with the unjust minimum sentencing standards. And just as an interesting point of information, the treatment center that I worked at is called Turning Point, Inc. It's in North Minneapolis. And George Floyd came to Minneapolis from Houston, Texas, to go into treatment at Turning Point. And so, I don't know, it's just a little interesting circular kind of transition that, you know, funny how these things shape our world. But I saw how these blanket policies contributed to the ongoing inequities in our society. I saw how these policies led to America becoming the world's most incarcerated country by per capita. I saw how they could tear families apart, not just my clients' families, but my own as well. My little brother fell victim to the crack cocaine addiction and was imprisoned and then died from the ravages he experienced. Of course, now we're seeing something different happening with drug policies. The opioid epidemic, an epidemic that impacts more white families. The conversation has now shifted to from incarceration to compassion. After that, I worked for Hennepin County, where I was a counselor for mothers and families receiving public assistance. In 1996, the Clinton administration passed the Welfare Reform Act. And the amount of time a family could receive federal cash assistance was limited to 5 years. Once again, I saw how policy could put a heavy burden on people. And in this case, it was women and children. Policy can have a big impact on people's lives. It certainly has had one on mine, particularly as I came to terms with my own gender identity. From a very young age, I felt different. But I also felt the societal pressure to conform to the ideals of masculinity. So I tried, rather successfully, I might add, to go along. I played football in high school. I joined a fraternity in college. I actually became president of said fraternity. I got married and fathered a beautiful daughter. However, the internal struggle to be one's true self is powerful. I came out to my family as bisexual, but that was not the full truth. I wanted to be fully authentic with myself and with those I love. As it turns out, that my city, Minneapolis, was a pretty good place to do that. Minneapolis was actually the first city in the country to pass protections for transgender people. So 5 years after working for Hennepin County, I came out as a transgender woman. This was one of the most liberating experiences in my life. I joined several nonprofit organizations, at first as a way to ensure that I had allies if I ever needed them. But after a while, I found that the more I fought to improve the lives of others, I was improving life for myself. I worked for the county for another 5 years after that. Coming to terms with my true self allowed me to flourish in ways that I hadn't been able to before. I wanted to do more than improve people's lives. I wanted to do more to improve people's lives. So I finished my undergraduate degree after 20 years. I went on to obtain a graduate degree in community economic development. After I graduated, I attended the Community Leadership Institute at the University of St. Thomas, and there I met a young Robert Lilligren, who was running for city council. When he won his seat, he appointed me to serve as his senior policy aide in City Hall. And that's how I started working in politics and seeing how you could improve people's lives through elected office. I went on to serve in this role for 2 subsequent city council members for a total of 12 years. During doing this work, I learned the rigors of elected office and the fortitude required to fight for equity and full equality for all people. I also learned that if you want to be effective, you have to have a broad-based intersectional approach. Robert identifies as a Native American gay man, but that never defined how he governed. Rather, it informed his decision-making. In 2016, when my former boss, Elizabeth Glidden, decided not to seek re-election, I started to thinking about running for office myself. I attended campaign trainings through the Victory Fund, a group that teaches LGBTQ people how to run for office. And I put together an amazing group of activists, community leaders, and politicos, who, by the way, were almost all women. And we put together a campaign plan. I was already planning to run when America elected a reality TV star to be our president. But that election gave me extra incentive. I knew that cities were going to become the center of political change in our society. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that change. What I didn't know is that George Floyd would get murdered in my district and I would be at the epicenter of that. But that's how politics is. So a couple of community members organized this campaign on Facebook called Run, Andrea, Run. It got more than 500 likes and comments encouraging me to run for office. It was clear that people needed someone to believe in light of that 2016 election. So I announced that I was running for office 1 month before Donald Trump was sworn into office. And actually, just a little insider information today, I am formally announcing that I am running for re-election just a couple of months after Donald Trump has been kicked out of office. Yes. But for the first 5 months of my campaign, we did not have an opponent, at least not a personal one. But I told my team that we were always running against the opponents of racism, sexism, and transphobia. And we saw those opponents at work in little ways and big ways on the campaign trail. At one event, a person assumed that I must be running in the ward representing the predominantly Black community on the north side. And in fact, I was running to represent a more diverse community on the south side. Another time, a person asked me bluntly, so how do you handle door knocking as a Black transgender person? Facing things like that, I knew that we needed to run a campaign that was focused on the issues, the policies that impact people's lives in the 8th Ward and throughout the city of Minneapolis. We hosted our own community forums. We showed up at community events. We went to neighborhood meetings, parades, ice cream socials, you name it. We made thousands of phone calls and knocked on hundreds of doors. We worked hard to reach every voter. We especially wanted to reach out to people who weren't likely to show up to vote, folks who had been historically shut out of the electoral process. We wanted to engage young people of color who had never voted before. We wanted to engage the immigrant community, the transgender community, and the broader LGBT community. And all of that work paid off. We increased voter turnout in my district by 11%, and it was a pretty high voter turnout already. And we won the seat with 73% of the vote. And as you guys know, today's electoral politics, if you get 51% of the vote, you're doing pretty good. It still blows my mind to this day. But to me, it says that people want change. They want rights for immigrants, people with disabilities, and LGBTQIA people. They want women's rights and reproductive rights. They believe that Black lives matter. They want to see everyone treated as equal human beings, and they want everyone's lives to be better. I have seen how policy impacts people's lives, politics too. The late senator from Minnesota, Paul Wellstone, said that politics is about improving people's lives. And that's why I run, and that's why I serve. So with that, I just wanna say, once again, thank you so much for this opportunity to share. And, I think this might be a good time to bring up any of those questions, maybe, Christian, that people have shared with you, or if people have questions or comments or thoughts that they want to talk about. We can certainly talk about the state of Minneapolis today, or how Mayflower can be a more welcoming environment, more supportive environment for trans, gender non-conforming, identified people. Talk about the work that you guys are hopefully doing around racial equity and racial justice. So, questions?
Yeah, for sure. Firstly, thank you so much for your time, for your thoughts, and for everything you read. Everybody, let's do this or hit the little clap reaction on your screens. Give Councilwoman Jenkins a round of applause.
I know that is the one challenge with presenting online, is that you just don't get that audience feedback, which I kind of thrive on, but it does feel good to see the hands in the air and the little clap thing from the Zoom.
For sure. I got you. Is it okay? I should ask this before I did, but I spotlighted you here in your screen, so it looks like you can only see yourself and some people at the top. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, got
It's fine with me.
okay, gotcha. I have some questions for you, and everyone who's here, of course, take note what Councilwoman Jenkins said. You know, you're kind of free to just ask or comment on kind of anything. I'll start out with this question here. Andrea, you are providing leadership as someone who is conscious of intersectionality. What does it mean for us as a community and society to have diverse leadership representing us in government, particularly when there's a strong of who we are as a community and nation?
So there was just one little piece that I lost, particularly when we are, and then it faded out.
Gotcha.
Very
Particularly,
good.
particularly when there is strong disagreement of who we are as a community and nation.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's important at any time, in my opinion, to have diverse leadership. I mean, the first 200 plus 50 plus years of our um, American experiment was run by completely by old white men. Um, and it has it has led us to a place of really deep inequities, and placed white men, quite frankly, at the top of the food chart, and everybody else um, is second class to that. And
City Council transgender person from Mayflower.
Everyone could please mute your screens once again, please.
so it, you know, why is it important? We must have people who have lived experiences with the challenges that our our communities are facing, and to be able to bring those experiences into the policy making, decision making process, because these things do impact our lives so significantly. And just talk a little bit about a, a seemingly innocuous policy that the city of Minneapolis has made in recent years. And, and there's a very good reason for it, right? Um, the city of Minneapolis, about 5 years ago, decided that we are no longer going to use plastic bags to um, collect our leaves in the fall when we rake our leaves, right? We have to, we remember we would see all of these plastic bags, big hefty bags piled up in people's lawns. And so the city banned those for a very good reason. Plastic bags are creating really significant challenges in for climate change, right? They don't degrade. They, I mean, it just plastic lasts forever, and it mucks up our landfills and just creates really significant problems as it relates to climate change. And so the policy shift was to use compostable bags. Well, compostable bags, which is a very, I think, honorable idea, but they cost more than plastic bags. I mean, you can buy a box of hefty bags for about $3, and you might get 80 bags. you you buy the compostable bags, you buy 5 bags and it's $8. You know, that's a pretty significant expense. And one of the things that we saw early on was that people in lower income communities of color were still using the plastic bags. And one of the consequences of using plastic bags was A, we won't pick it up, and B, you will get a fine. So not only could people not afford the bags, but they were being fined on top of it. So it was essentially taxing the poor. Um, and so, you know, that that policy got created without any concept, any thought process around how this is going to impact poor people. And like I said, it's a very admirable policy to make. However, it it will have some significant impacts. And so we have to be cognizant and able to think through those kinds of things. And you don't really get that if you just have one mindset, one thought process in that decision making body. Um, so I don't know. I think that may illustrate why it's important to have diverse voices, but certainly if it doesn't, we can continue this conversation.
No, thank you so much for that. That outlines a lot of times we have really ambitious ideas. And then when we put them into practice, we realize who we're leaving out and how we're perpetuating another form of marginalization. So, and that's a perfect example of something that happened or happening right here.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, we have worked to fix that. I mean, you know, it could have been resolved very easily with just, you know, hey, let's make paper compostable bags discounted for um, low income families, um, you know, or let's give just warnings instead of fines for, you know, education is a strong way to overcome those kinds of issues. Um, you know, my 78-year-old mom is composting now, uh, which, you know, without education, you know, I would have never expected her to be um, doing composting, but
Yeah,
you know, that's how we change society.
definitely. Thank you. Someone asks, what are your messages for Minneapolis youth, both trans and supporters of trans youth? Are Minneapolis schools doing what they need to support trans youth and trans families?
Um, I'll start with the latter first. I think Minneapolis public schools are doing better than many other school districts around the country in supporting trans and gender nonconforming youth. And it's important to kind of say gender nonconforming because I think, you know, as many people, one of the other things that you didn't mention in your very beautiful introduction, Kristen, is that I was an oral historian for the Transgender Oral History Project at the University of Minnesota, which was one of the largest oral history projects of its kind in the world that documented the lives of 198 trans and gender nonconforming people all over the United States and Canada. Um, so making it kind of an international project. Um, But at any rate, one of the things that I left that project understanding is that our notion of gender, all of us, what we think about gender now as a man and a woman, in 50 years, that is going to be completely a relic of history. Gender continues to evolve. I think young people are deeply exploring their own genders in ways that have never really been exposed before. I think people have been doing it throughout the history of time, but it's just been completely sort of internalized. And now those internal expressions are being outwardly expressed. But Minneapolis has been, the Minneapolis public school system has been really doing a lot on that front to support trans and gender nonconforming young people. There are many youth groups that have emerged over the years. And, you know, one of the best parts of this job for me is I've been getting the opportunity to talk to young people at, you know, De La Salle High School, Allen Page, junior high school, South High, Southwest, you know, young people from around the country have been reaching out to me to kind of, you know, engage with their classrooms and in their communities. And so, you know, there seems to be a lot of support, um, particularly here in the Twin Cities. I think they can be doing much more. You know, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the state of Minnesota is that in the surveys that they do of young people in schools, they have now included gender identity as an option for students to identify as. And thus far, at the last survey, which I think was in 2017, maybe 16, 3% of all Minnesota students identified as either trans or gender nonconforming. That's a really high number. And that's just the kids who were confident enough to actually check that box. I personally think the numbers are much higher than that. And I think we will see that as evidenced in the next student survey that the Department of Education does. But just the fact that they added that opportunity for people to express more genders than one, I think says that there is support for um, young people. You know, at the college level, almost every university in the state now has gender nonconforming bathrooms. They have options for people to use their names. I teach at Minneapolis Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and there our students can self-identify their names and pronouns differently from what they were assigned at birth. And I think those kinds of changes are trickling down to our public school systems and pre-secondary education opportunities. So, you know, I think the landscape in public schools in support of trans and gender nonconforming people are promising and um, encouraging. Can it be better? Absolutely. Um, I think that some of the school districts outside of Minneapolis are still struggling with these issues, and young people are being harmed. One of the things that I was really proud of that we were able to do on the Minneapolis City Council, um, and my colleague Lee Cunningham, who was also a Black transgender identified person, we passed a ban on conversion therapy, which a lot of families put their young people through when they learn that either they are transgender or gender nonconforming and or um, gay or lesbian or bisexual. And so, to have those kinds of policies in place, I think uh, makes the landscape a little brighter for trans and gender nonconforming people. You did mention, Christian, that I started the Transgender Equity Summit, which is 2021. It will be our 8th year in doing that. Um, in 2020, we went virtual. And so that allowed us the opportunity to open it up uh, to younger students, to Minneapolis public school students to be able to participate since it was a virtual environment. And I think opportunities like that make the landscape a little brighter too. Great question. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Councilwoman. A question that I have is what did you need as you came out as transgender? How can we help support trans people in our midst?
Sure. Um, you know, I have been so just completely blessed and fortunate in my life. I had a relatively supportive family. Like, they didn't understand, but they did not kick me out of the family. They struggled with me to try to understand. Um, and to this day, I have a very close relationship with, you know, my mom, my sisters, my daughter, my grandchildren. I had 3 grandkids. They call me Grandy. Um, the absolute joy of my life. My aunts and uncles, my cousins, we all, one of the things this morning, Christian, we had this family text thing, and one of my family members sends out the daily word every day, and so today's daily word was gratitude. So that's why I was feeling grateful. Being a supportive family to a trans or gender nonconforming person is absolutely the most important thing that you can do. We know. I participated as an advisor to a 2015 survey of transgender and gender nonconforming people all over the United States. And one of the things that we know is that um, when people have supportive families, they do 80% better than um, trans identified people who have been kicked out of their families. Um, people suffer from homelessness, unemployment, um, chemical addiction, from being shunted from society, isolation, loneliness, and all of those things have significant impacts on people's mental health. So, the best way to be an ally is to confront people who are transphobic, really try to support family members if they come out um, to you or others in your family. Um, you know, uh, many organizations that support trans and gender nonconforming people need financial support because they're just, I think trans organizations receive less than 0.5% of all the philanthropic dollars um, in the country. And so these organizations that serve these communities are really struggling significantly. So, support organizations like the Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition or um, uh, families, I'm trying to think of families like ours, which is a transgender family support group. I know that Mayflower used to be a site for the PFLAG organization, which supports families of gay and lesbian and transgender folks. And so, those kinds of opportunities, I think, really help to move the things forward. Educate yourselves like you guys doing today. I mean, I think that's an important part of the process. And, just recognize that, trans and gender nonconforming people, LGBTQ people are human beings too. And respond to all the same things that any other community responds to. And in your workplaces, in volunteer environments, include trans people. State that we are a welcoming community, and that brings people into the door. Normalize using pronouns so that these things become a part of our daily interactions with each other. So those are some of the thoughts that I have.
Thank you, Councilwoman. A question that I had was, what are your visions for the future of Minneapolis? What are your policy priorities?
Well, we have to get control of our public safety mechanisms in the city of Minneapolis. We've really been struggling. There's been a significant increase in crime here in Minneapolis and throughout the country. So Minneapolis is not really unique in that, though it certainly is a part of our struggle and the things that we have to deal with as a community. I really want to see us tackle these deep inequities that are in our society. And so to that end, I currently chair the Race and Equity Subcommittee. I have introduced racism as a public health crisis. A public health emergency. But, it is a crisis or an emergency. I had one reporter ask me, what's the difference between a crisis and an emergency? And I'm like, they both mean that there is a very imminent problem in our midst, and that needs to be resolved. So, my vision is that we be honest with ourselves, honest with our communities about the harms that have been done to communities of color, particularly African American and Native American communities, and really work to redress those and bring more equity to those communities. We certainly have to rebuild Lake Street, Broadway, and many of the communities that have been deeply impacted by the unrest of last summer. Um, we have to support business development and home ownership. Um, really want to see communities of color thriving in this community, not just surviving. Um, I want to see the intersection at 38th and Chicago that I mentioned at the top of the call, and an intersection that I have been working on for the past 20 plus years, become a mecca for the social justice movement, and really highlight the not only the injustices that have led to the deaths of unarmed Black people throughout our country, but to offer hope and to offer um, uh, a way forward for communities to think about how we can improve social justice. We have an opportunity. I mean, as tragic as 2020 was, it also presents us with an opportunity to do better, to do more, to think more creatively. We have to address the climate crisis in our communities. And I think we can do that through infrastructure investments, through green energy investments, create jobs for young people in this green economy space, and also using the arts as a tool for economic development in ways that we can grow together. I want to see more cooperative opportunities in the city of Minneapolis, where communities are coming together to purchase commercial properties, to purchase the businesses, so that people have ownership into those things that they are spending. When we at work, we spend more time at work than we do with our families sometimes, and so we should have ownership in those processes and those practices. And that's some of the visions that I have for the city moving forward. Yeah, we have to be more prepared for climate crises, more prepared for you know these kinds of emergency situations, because unfortunately, until we get a handle, we're going to be facing more of these sort of catastrophic events in the future. And how do we be prepared for that as a society to take care of each other? More mutual aid kinds of initiatives that work hand in hand with government and philanthropic organizations. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, and on that note, it looks like we've come upon the end of our time here. So everyone, if you could visually or with your reactions or whatever, give Councilwoman Andrea Jenkins, or type in the chat box, say thank you.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity. As I said, I am grateful. I'm really grateful, and The sun is out. I live directly across the street from a park, so I am watching young people sliding down the hill on this fresh new snow that I'm about to go outside and remove from my sidewalk now because it's the law. So,
Yeah.
so clean up your sidewalks, everybody.
Sidewalk. And thank you for sharing your poetry and that essay with us. Just really quick, someone earlier asked about the book that it is that you wrote. Is it just that one that one poetry collection you have? Can you hold it up again for us?
Well, the poetry collection, and I do have several chapbooks, but the poetry collection is called The Tea is Not Silent. It is available on Amazon.com. The essay that I read is called Why I Run, 35 Progressive Candidates Changing Politics. I'm so proud to be included in this collection that includes Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Alexandria Cortez, Ocasio-Cortez, Pramila Jayapal. It's just really amazing to be included in this anthology. So it's called Why I Run, 35 Progressive Candidates who are changing politics.
Tough. That's tough right there.
Yeah.
Well, have a lovely rest of your morning, Councilwoman. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.
And
Have
for
a wonderful weekend, and please stay safe. It's, I know things are tough right now in the city of Minneapolis, but I am convinced and optimistic that things will get better.
we're gonna pull through for sure. Thank you, Councilwoman. You have a great rest of your morning.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.